Join me in making this fun indigo bracelet. The indigo bracelet is actually a product of a design live in Facebook. We're going to be using beam beads and 2-holed cabs. Both Checkmate products, we're going to be working with multiple holes and actually making it semi three-dimensional as we build this bracelet. So to begin the Indie necklace, which if you're not familiar with, I actually did this during a design live on Facebook. One of the challenges of jewelry making is designing pieces and realizing that what you see as the finished product is not what it started at as the beginning. So to begin this Indie bracelet, we're going to be using 2 needles with the beam beads. The beams are 3-holed beads, and we're going to be using them to kind of capture in these cabochons. These cabochons are the 7mm check cabs, and it has that kind of nice blue eye. So to begin, we're actually going to be using our clasp first since we have 2 needles. When I did the design with the Design Live, I actually used 1 needle, but it's going to be much easier to teach with 2. So you can use 1, but keep in mind 2 is easy to teach with. Add a 15, 11, and 15 to your needle. Go ahead and put on a button or a clasp or a closure. This happens to be a faceted table cup button in the crystal travertine. And I'm going to let that drop to the middle of 5 feet of beading thread. From here then, with that crystal button at the end, I want you to go ahead and add 3 15s on both the right and the left needle. If you're not familiar with working with 2 needles at one time, generally speaking, when you do work with 2 needles, whatever the right needle does, the left needle does as well. I'm going to then take 1 11-0 seed bead and crisscross, taking 1 needle from right to left and the other from left to right. Make sure when you do this, pull the needles at the same time so you make sure you're still in the middle of your beading thread. I'm then going to separate out my needles, 1 to the left and 1 to the right. And I'm going to repeat that count of 3. So 3 beads on the right and then 3 on the left as well. If you're not as comfortable with both hands and using 2 needles, it gets much easier. But what you can do is kind of put 1 needle down and start with a 2nd needle. Do 1 needle with the right and then switch to the other one. Once you have those 3 beads on, we're going to put our first beam on. We're going to add 1 beam to the right needle, along with 1 15-0, and then 1 more beam. We're going through one of the first holes of the beams, so they're going to be laying right next to each other. Put that on the right needle, and then with the left needle, go through those same beads, crossing the other direction. So just like we did with the 11-0 seed bead, we're going to repeat that crisscross. Pull the threads down, and you'll be left with your 2 beams kind of hanging out there on the side. Those are going to eventually sit open like that so we can put our cab in. And what I'm going to do to get them, to get my needle towards the middle of the piece, is I'm going to be adding along the side of the beam an 11 with 2 15s on the side with both my right needle, and then same with the left. 11 with a 15 on either side. We're then going to take the needle and thread from the first hole of that beam to the 2nd hole of the beam and come out the middle of the design. I'm going to do that both on the right side and the left side. So both needles will be exiting in the middle of the beam with those seed beads just kind of hanging out and decorating the side piece. From here then, we're going to go into the center of the piece and add seed beads in the middle, and then hop from the middle hole to the outer hole as well. Separating out the needles in the middle here, I want you to add a 11 with 2 15s on the side, just like we did on the exterior. The needle that's in your right hand that has those beads on, you're going to go through the beam to the left and pull the needle through. The thread that's on the left and currently in the middle is going to go through those beads as well. And to make it easier, I'm just going to kind of flip it in my hand So I'm not sewing towards myself, I'm sewing away from myself. I'll go back through those 3 beads out on the side of the beam. So now the needle that was on the left is on the right, and the needle that was on the right is on the left. Coming out, I'm going to mimic kind of that step up with the little pyramid of beads with the 15, 11, 15. And we're going to go towards the middle then, coming through the next hole of the beam. Again, we do that on the right, and then picking up the needle that's on the left, I'm going to do the same thing on the left-hand side. So on goes 15, 11, 15. And then in towards the center of your beam. So we're repeating that basically whenever you get to the outside of your beam, you're repeating that 11, 15, 11 count. So that way it's going to decorate the sides of the beam. From here, we're going to go in and actually add our cabochon. And to add the cabochon, it has 2 holes. I'm going to separate my threads here from my right and my left. And then going into those 2 holes, I'm going to add with my right needle a 15, my cab, making sure that I'm going through the lower hole when it's sitting, because it has 2 holes and it's sitting flat. It does have a front and a bottom, so I want it sitting so the bottom flat side is down and I'm going through that lower hole. Add another 15 and let your needle hang out there. On the other side here, I want you to go through that same 15 cab and out. Pull nice and tightly. And now we're actually going to decorate the cab, getting kind of that look of that pop of that indigo eye. I actually took my needle and thread on the left here back through that 15. I need to bring it back out. So it's coming out through the cab. So 15 goes on the left, goes on the right, and we crisscross through that cab and come on out. When I'm out through that cab, on the outer edge, I'm going to add in 4 of my 15s on the right needle. That needle that is on the right is going to go in and catch on to the 11 that sits right below it. So it's going to catch on to that 11. I'm going to add 4 more 15s and then sew back through the cabochon. Give a little tight pull, and that's going to pull those seed beads up and almost get ready to make that nice kind of curvature for the cab. Coming out the cab here, we're going to design and just add a tiny little bit of extra beads, adding just like we've been doing. It's kind of that repetition, 15, 11, 15. We're going to go from the bottom hole to the top hole of the cabochon, both the right and now with the left. 15, then 11, then 15. From here, from the bottom hole of the cab, I want you to go to the top hole of the cab. And that decorates those seed beads kind of right along the cabochon itself. Coming out the cabochon then, we're basically going to be doing a reverse. To do the reverse, we actually have to start out doing the V on the side of the cabochon before we go in and actually add in some of our next ones of our beams. So the first thing that I've done is added 4 15s, then 1 11, and then 4 15s onto my needle. I'm only going to do this with the right needle, going back through the cabochon in a circular motion. So my needle, the thread's coming out the right, I put on those 9 beads, and I go back through the cab so the needle's coming out the right again. That's going to get those beads in position there so I can come back as I'm adding on the actual beams and catch on to that. So now to add on the beams and start with the beams on this side, I want to add a 15 and a beam to the right and a 15 and a beam to the left. And with this beam, this metallic bronze iris mix, I'm not really worrying what I pick up. That's going to add in my beams and get ready to kind of create that V that we're going to mimic on the other side here, going from the one hole of the beam to the other hole. From here, to get it established and into place, we are going to add on our sides that same count again, which is really popular in this indie bracelet. 15, 11, 15, in through the center hole of the beam. Right here, I also want to make sure that I'm giving a nice tight pull, getting that beam as close and as tight as possible. Sticking down the left needle, I'll pick up the right and go through as well again. 15, 11, 15. As we go in with the 15, 11, 15 combo, back towards the middle and out nice and tightly. Give a nice tight yank and a tight pull. And then when you're coming out the middle, make sure those seed beads that you added, kind of pop those to the top. The needle that's on the left is going to add a 15, go through the 11, add another 15, and out through that middle hole of the beam on the right. Give a nice tight pull, and that pulls those beams in. Again, I want to make sure that the seed beads are at the top and the beams are to the bottom. The needle that's hanging out in the middle here is going to go back through those same seed beads. So go back through the 15, and then the 11, then the 15, and out the beam on the other side. This will establish then the needles and thread back to the right and the left. Again, kind of pop those up so they fall a little bit back to the bottom. And then coming out the outer edge, we're going to basically start over. We have 15, 11, 15 in towards the top beam, add a 15, and exit through the left-hand side. On the other side now, I'm going to repeat that, going with an 11, 15, or I'm sorry, 15, 11, 15, going through the beam, through the 15 that sits beside them, and out the beam on the right-hand side. Coming out then the end of that bird's eye there, that indigo eye, we're going to do a little cross section here. I built another one of the components so you could see it made. It's also a really cute earring, so you can take those components and make it into an earring as well. Coming out here, again, you have the needles on the right and the left-hand side. And what we're going to do is actually do almost like a crisscross pattern and get a little X in there to do the connection spot. I went back and forth on adding different beads and doing connections, and I actually liked it very simple, a couple different ways. So we're going to do a collection of two 15s and an 11 and two 15s with the right needle. With the left, I pick up two 15s, and then just like we did in the beginning after the clasp, we're going to cross through or share that 11L. So the thread and needle are going to be coming out opposite ends of that 11L, and then two 15s go after the shared 11. From there, I'm going to get ready then to go in and add my next set of beams, which is going to be just like the beginning where we came out of the actual cross of the button as well. So you're just adding on your right needle one of your beams, a 15 and a beam, and then picking up the other needle and crossing through those through the opposite direction. Beam, 15, beam. When you pull it down tight, you're going to see a little bit of thread along the actual beam here at that connection point. But by the time that it curls under a little bit and we add our side beads here, you're not going to see any extra thread along the beams. So I'm going to continue after this connection point, adding in more of my little indigo eyes here, and I'll continue adding length to the bracelet. Once you reach the end of the bracelet, and I have in 6 cabochons or 6 of my indigo eyes, I added to my bracelet, just like if I was going to be getting ready to do the next set. I have my 2 seed beads and then, or my 2 15s and then my 1 11L. After that, I added 36 of my 15O seed beads to one of the needles, that same needle. From here, I'm going to go back through that 11O seed bead so that my thread is coming out through that 11O. Give a nice tight pull. And the needle on the other side, I'm going to repeat that, which is going to reinforce that clasp, adding in 2 15s, going up through that 11O, and then the whole way through the clasp section. If you are using a metal clasp, a clasp garden, another button, you would be doing the same thing here. If you did have a metal clasp, you might want a wire guard or a wire protector and adding that in as well. If you wanted to be doing a necklace, same thing, you would add your necklace in for this. It's important whenever you are using a clasp or getting to the clasp portion that you reinforce and you don't just have one piece of thread going through that piece. So from here now, I have 2 pieces of thread that are going through the actual piece of the clasp section. Now what we're going to do is bring our thread and needle back along the sides here, down the right and down the left, which is going to act as our kind of cinch to push that up so we make sure that our eyes are sitting embedded and actually almost framed out by those beam beads. Coming down the sides now to add into the pendant, I did a little bit on the right-hand side so you could see kind of the effect that's happening and how that eye is getting kind of pulled in. So with the left needle, you're going to do the exact same thing that I just did a little bit with the right. I'm going to come down after the clasp out through my 2 seed beads, and I'm going to be catching on to the seed beads that are on the outside of the beam, going through basically all of the ones that are on the first section of the beam, all the 15s and 11s that linked from one loop to the next, or one hole to the next hole. Coming out the last 15 closest to my cabochon, I'm going to be adding 2 15s, 1 11, and then 2 more 15s. From there, skip over to the next beads along the next beam, going through the 15, 11, 15, and then the next 15 and the 11. So you're not coming out through basically that second 15 on that first grouping. Give it a nice little tight yank, and that pulls that kind of nesting up, and that gives you a little bit more of that 3D curvature. If you like it sitting flat better, all you need to do is add 1 more 15O inside between each of the 11s. So you're going to add 3, 1, 3. I want that curvature, so I'm adding 2, 1, 2. After you come out of the last 11 along the beam, you're going to be adding in some 15s, and we're going to do 4 15s onto the needle. Skip that first 15 and go into along the beams, that 11, 15, and then you're going to catch on to the next grouping of that little kind of picot trim of the 15, 11, 15. And again, when you're coming out close to that cab, on goes 2 15s, 1 11, 2 15s. As I put those beads on then, I'm going to go over to the next beam, and you're going through again the 15, 11, 15. Through the next 15 and the 11 and out. To catch on to the next 11 then, we're going to add 4 15s and go into the next grouping. So skipping the first 15, going into the 11. So basically when you're on the sides of the X's, you're going in and out of the 11O seed beads. when you're on the sides of the cabs, you are going to be going into the 15-0s that sit right at the end of the beams. So I'll come down both the right and the left needle, kind of doing that a little bit. And you can see now when I put that piece down, as I pull my threads, how that makes that little pop. And it's gonna make the bracelet just a tiny bit shorter, but that 3D look is so much cooler than it just sitting flat, in my opinion. Either work. If you do wanna do a necklace, the flat works really well for a nice curve. If you do want to do the bracelet or a ring, I like that nice kind of bubbling effect. So I'm going to continue down the sides of the piece, adding in my seed beads along the edges. As you finish rounding out your seed beads and kind of adding everything in, your bracelet will decrease about 1/4 of an inch. So keep that in mind. Like I said, I did 6 of my little eyes here, but as you pull it tight and it gets that little bit of that curvature, you do have it that it decreases a tiny bit in length as you're working with it. So keep that in mind as you're working with the piece, that if you do need a 7th bead in there, you may need that for a standard size wrist. As you're finishing up and you're coming out the piece, we're going to use this opportunity to reinforce our clasp. I'm going to come out the last 15 of the beam on both the right and the left, and then I'm going to go right up into that faceted table cut button. So that table cut button, I'm going to go up through those 3 15s that sit before the 11. Then I'm going to go through the 11s as well as through the button. Coming out the top of the button, if you can grab onto those seed beads. If you have trouble because of the curvature of the button or the clasp that you're using, you can also just tuck right back in the button. I'm going to go down the button on the other side, down through those 3 15s, and also, since I'm there, right through that 11-0 seed bead. I'm going to give a nice tight pull so I make sure that all that extra thread along the side is pulled in and that my curvature that I want to happen is happening nicely. Going in then on the other side, I will literally do the exact same thing, going through that 15-0 along the side here, and then also in addition to that 15-0, up through those 15s that are going to sit on the side of the button. And then I'm going to bring my thread and needle out right next to the 11-0. Give a nice little tight yank. Go through the 11-0. You can go up through your button, down through on the other side. And then what you're going to want to do is go through the 3 beads along the edge there. I'm going to sew into the beam then and over to the other side of the beam. Once you get your thread and needle to the same spot, all you're going to do is tie it off and take a thread zap or a thread burner and burn down the 2 edges. As much as possible, you want to make sure the tension on both sides is the same when tying the knot, and then also make sure that you bring that knot to the back of the project prior to burning it down. That way you won't see it as much. You can also separate the threads after doing the knot and burn them down at different sides of the project. Thanks so much for joining me and making the Indigo bracelet. Remember, if you need any of the materials, you can go back to the beginning of the video, as well as below the video in the description box, which is near the subscribe and the like button. Keep in mind, if you comment too, it helps me to know exactly what colors it would look great in, helps everybody else watching the video, and lets us know exactly what you like and don't like about the different video productions that we're doing. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy making and grabbing the materials for the new Indigo bracelet.